Okay, so again, this is kind of a continuation. We started at 1, and we've been working our ways through the 3 versions of the Olivet prophecy. What I will do, since this is the sermon, we'll give a little more background, and so we will pick it back up in Luke. I'm sorry, I lied. Yeah, there we are. Okay, I got my notes. I stuck it in the Bible here when I left the podium, and they're not. I didn't put them in the great organization, but we'll figure it out. So, Olivet Prophecies, again, then for those tuning in, references the situation where Jesus and the 12 were, they toured, I think, the temple previously, and then they went out the Mount of Olives, and were kind of looking again from a distance and looking at the buildings, and I'm sure it was a fairly impressive sight at that time, and thinking about us going to one of our big cities and looking from a distance and seeing the neat, sometimes skyline we have. And in that case, they said, check out these buildings, and Christ said, but they're all going to be torn down. It's all going to be destroyed. And then a discourse started. They asked questions. He answered. And there were 3 different versions in the New Testament. So we have the 4 Gospels. John, who strangely enough was the only one of the 4 Gospels who was an eyewitness to all of these events. We think that some of them witnessed more, but Luke, who was not there initially, wrote it. Mark, who was certainly part of the early church, but not part of the 12. And then Matthew, who was almost certainly part of the later group, but not part of the 4 who initiated the conversation. So we don't know what he didn't initially hear, but Matthew, being a good tax attorney, he was a tax guy, so certainly he was good with numbers. And the answer was 79 years. And no, I did not use a calculator. So yeah, next year we'll have a big celebration, I'm sure, and then in 21 years we'll have the even greater one, assuming not everyone has forgotten the sacrifices of the greatest generation. But Matthew was the only one of the 3 who wrote about this. He was an actual eyewitness, but we get the 2 versions we've looked at were very, very similar, and it's like, when you look at something, George would say, look at that lovely rose, and I would say, look at that lovely red rose, and there's but it's different. Well, he just added a little more that he saw there, or I'm colorblind, but whatever you want to take from that, it's I don't have any problems in the slight variations of the accounts, because they're all frankly consistent in the same purpose. But they do add a slightly different color, and we had referenced in the Bible study that Mark was the only one of the 3 accounts that identified the 4 individuals that kind of started this conversation with Jesus, being the 2 sets of brothers. Although we're not positive that James, the big James, was the one that was there versus James the lesser, or of the James that described it, didn't say it was the sons of Zebedee. But we're talking about prophecy, and in some cases end times, and I would say in some cases of the Olivet we're talking about the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and we should not have any problem with that. When you think about if I was beginning a ministry in my 30s, which been a while back, but anyway, let's just say whatever started. Let's say that happened, and I was my ministries were in Houston, Texas, and someone were to say, Bill, you can do your work here and now, but the place is going to be in ashes. It's going to be a big mushroom cloud is going to be over Houston in 40 years. You'd kind of want to know that. I think that would probably be a good thing to know. And obviously, as a Christian, you always want to know about the return of Jesus. And then we have that part, I've described it, part of our spiritual DNA is a desire to envision Christ's return. Sometimes when we close our eyes at night and think about, a better world and Christ on its throne, knowing that the rulers of this world are primarily out for their own personal benefit. And it's sad but true, and we see it more and more each generation. But as we have passages where we talk about, at least partially about the end of the age, we're not going to spend time in Revelation. I've referenced it a couple of times, and there's some continuity and some similarities between what's described in the Revelation, now I have to think about Revelation 7-ish, talking about the seals, and that the earthquakes and the heavenly signs. I think the 6th seal, and I on purpose didn't spend a lot of time there, but that we intuitively know that a good chunk of what's in these passages are about Christ's return, but that they asked him a question that really was about two separate times, because they want to know when the temple was going to be destroyed, and they want to know when he was going to be returning, and those events are 2,000 years apart-ish. We don't know for sure. It could be more. It could be less. But and then he talked very fluidly about the signs of both those things, describing and didn't really tell them which was which, because at that time they believed it was the same event, which it was not. And Christ allowed them to remain in their ignorance. But before we jump back into Luke, let's talk about, so if you were to say, what is a scripture in the New Testament that is clearest about kind of the Christ's return and the events leading up to it, you might see there's some passages in Peter, Timothy, obviously Revelation, but Revelation is so allegorical. There's going to be some confusion involved, and obviously a lot of it's fairly complicated, and he looks like he's describing things that there were no terms for in his time. So I actually picked 1 Thessalonians 4, so that's where we're going to start. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 13. But I would not have you ignorant, brothers, concerning those who are asleep, that you be not grieved, even as others who have no hope. So we talked about, the place of safety and being saved in a place where, we're in God's hands. That's what he's talking about. So for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, think about the importance of those events spilled so quickly into one sentence, but that's the basis of our religion. Even so, God will also bring with him all those who have fallen asleep through Jesus. For we say this to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord shall not go before those who are asleep. What does this tell you? The idea that all those events would occur fairly quickly in their lifetimes was still shared, and certainly Paul, even when he came on the scene, the belief in the church was that Christ would come back fairly fast. And there's nothing wrong with that. If Christ had not wanted us to remain in ignorance, he would have told us a little bit more at that time, right? But as clearly there was a need to know, and we did not need to know, and they did not need to know, and he preferred them to think his return was imminent. We talk about the bad servants and falling asleep and beating their fellow servants. If 2,000 years ago the church had known that Christ wasn't returning for at least 2,000 more years, I'm not sure we'd have as many faithful as that. I think there's just something in our limited, linear way of thinking that's hard for us to get really fired up about something that's going to be 2,000 years in the future. And I think he didn't want to handcuff us or impair our ability to have faith. It's hard enough for us to be not like we pick on him, but doubting Thomas, where we had to put our hands in the holes, and we're very physical beings, and the idea that his return was so far off would have been difficult for the church. So I totally get why he didn't tell them everything. Anyway, where were we? All right, so verse 16, for the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with a voice of the archangel, and with a trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we shall ever be with the Lord. I mean, is there anything else we really need to know? It's like, it's going to work out. We're either going to be dead and he's going to take care of us, or we're going to be alive and he'll come up. And I got to tell you, I don't care which it is. I'm pretty good. I mean, in one respect, if I'm dead and I get a front row seat, I get a better seat than if I'm alive, right? I mean, we're already there. So anyway. Verse 18, therefore, comfort one another with these words. And we do, all the time, right? And as life proceeds and we get older, that's why we're not sadder. In some ways, that's why we're happier. And that's why we can have happy older years, is that, you see these young guys, you want them to live a great life, and it's like, sucker, I'm going to be with God sooner than you. So, you got to live through all the foolishness that's going to come over the next 20 years. You want to be a prophet, let's talk about some of the crazy that's getting ready to come down right now. I mean, it's unbelievable. But So continuing on in the next chapter, 1 Thessalonians 5:1, but of the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need that I write it to you. Why do they have no need? Because we don't need to know. He would have told us if he'd wanted us to know, and he really didn't want us to know. And I told you why he didn't want 2,000 years of Christianity to know, because it would have removed the possible immediacy of Christ's return. And that just helps our faith. That's fine. And he also said, I have no need that I write to you, not because they already knew, but because they didn't know and they didn't need to know. And he didn't want them to what? Waste their time trying to figure it out. Verse 2, for you yourselves know accurately that the day of the Lord comes like a prize fight announced 6 months in advance with front row seats available. No, that's not what it says. The day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night. And we've got some pretty dumb thieves in America, I tell you. That's true. But not many of them would say, you know what, you guys need to leave the house in about 6 hours. I'm going to come back and steal all your possessions. And you don't get warning when you're going to get robbed. And if you do get warned, that's a really bad thief. And he didn't make allowances for a really dumb thief. As a thief of the night, verse 2, for when they shall see peace and safety, then sudden destruction shall come on them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But you, brothers, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you like a thief. Well, what does that mean? He said it comes... we don't know the time. We don't need to know the time, but it doesn't come upon us unawares. So whatever we're unaware of has nothing to do with signs about his return. It's about us being good Christians, good people, following Jesus through that time, right? It has to be. Let's stop there, but to me, I know we spent a lot of time in the Olivet prophecy, and it's pretty cool. It's neat stuff and neat to think about, and there was obviously the dual possible meanings. It kind of appeals to the quasi-intellectual me, that's the kind of stuff, right? It's like, ooh, it's kind of neat. We look at it from different angles and all. But this is the real one. This is the one that we should be spending our time on. And it's very nice that, at the end of 4, and beginning of 5, chapter 5, it says basically, guys, let's not worry about what it is, because we're not going to figure it out. He doesn't want us to figure it out. And if we do come up with a date, he's going to make sure it's not that one. That's just the way it is. Okay, so let's jump back to Luke 21. We'll finish up where we left off, and I apologize for those who were just dialing in for the sermon. We were at Luke 21, starting now back to verse 12. But before all these, they shall lay hands on you and shall persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and the prisons, also brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. So they were going to be attacked from every angle of society, from the religious, from the Romans, from, I guess they were bringing you to the prison. So they were going to just skip the trial and take you directly to prison. That happened a lot, although in those cases, they were normally let go eventually. And it shall return to you for a testimony. Therefore, settle in your hearts not to meditate beforehand what you shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom with all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And this is very similar to Mark's account. Verse 16, and you shall be betrayed also by parents and brothers and kinsmen and friends, and they will cause some of you to be put to death. And you shall be hated by all for my name's sake, but there shall not a hair on your head perish. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, and it seems to be talking about different things here. So obviously, if those who are put to death, if the not a hair on your head shall perish, it's probably not talking about the same type of scenario. But, talked about later on that if we were patient, that we would be saved. So I think we kind of agreed during the interactive that we're probably talking about a physical, a spiritual, not physical protection. However, I thought there was at least a possibility that if we were still talking primarily about AD 70 when Jerusalem fell, I don't see any indication that the church was. I think the church took the heed and the warnings, and then not many of them perished. what I would say is that of the four that he was talking to, well, I didn't look it up. James was definitely dead. He died fairly early on. I think was James the one that was thrown off the temple, and it was pretty ugly. But so you can't say none of you will lose a head, but because some of them weren't alive at that time. But anyway, it's something to think about, and there were some other references to that. But anyway, verse 20, and when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, and know that its destruction has come. And I know some of you are thinking, Bill, you're quite the idiot, because that's not where we stopped. That's where we stopped between the first and second, not the second and third. We were finishing up Mark, and that's why I was like, wait, we just talked about Mark. So what we're going to do, since Mark, it was fairly quick at that point, we're going to skip through and go directly now where I was trying to get to at the beginning of the service, but fell behind schedule. Let me look and see if there's anything in Mark that I wanted to hit before we jumped over. Verse 32, we know that. Okay, so let's look at Matthew 24, which is everybody's most familiar with. And as I said, as I was looking at my Bible, Matthew 24 has a lot more inspired margins. There he had, in some case, get your white out. But you know what? I said, when I see air and the air is my source, I don't shy from it at this point. It's like, it's part of being a human. When we get to the point where we think we can't be deceived and we can't be wrong, God does not have much use for us because we are deceived so terribly. It's fairly difficult to get anything through the thick skulls. Okay, Matthew 24, verse 1. Apologize for doubling up on Luke and missing a little bit of Mark, but it was about the same spot, frankly, in the narrative is either way. Matthew 24, 1, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. So most of the accounts are the same. As we're talking about, they were really focused on the temple itself and some of the buildings. So it was a very beautiful complex. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, there shall not be left here one stone on another that shall not be thrown down." And I think we kind of cover this fairly well. So all accounts, the destruction of all the buildings was complete down to foundations, and there really was not much left of it. And actually, I read through a long account about there was a full destruction of at least two of the walls, all the way down to the foundation as well. And they made sure that the purpose of a wall is for protection, especially in ancient times before there was gunpowder and explosives. So a two-legged wall. The place was pretty messed up. The fact that it might have had a few stones in the not outer buildings, but the walls that weren't gone, it was still complete. Verse 3, and he sat on the Mount of Olives, as we discussed. The disciples came to him privately, saying, so we know from Mark's account that there were the two sets of brothers, and what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the world? So this is different. Matthew is the only one who asked the question. Everybody said, "What shall be? When shall these things be?" Talking about when shall all the buildings be destroyed. And Matthew's the only one that says, "And of the end of the world." And I don't have a particular issue with that because, again, Matthew might have assumed that was the question that was asked because when he walked up, that's what he was also talking about, right? So, in fact, he might have been the one because Matthew was very meticulous as well as a tax collector. His notes might have been slightly more thorough, and that might have been that end of the world might have been there. But either way, Christ talked about the end of the world, so does it really matter? Probably not, but I thought it was interesting. And the other interesting part is we talk about, so John talks about the end of the world a whole lot in Revelation, or you could say God talked through John. But John was the only eyewitness, and he does not reference the Mount of Olives whole event at all in John. And it might be that he saw the other, all of his writings came later in life. It might have been that he saw what was already written and chose to focus on a different path. So that's why the first three look a lot like each other and kind of follow a similar path, more mostly chronological, especially for Luke, and then but they tend to cover almost the same things, and then you see John kind of goes off and does his own thing, which also is neat, of course. Okay, verse 4, and Jesus answered, said to them, take heed that no man deceive you. That's the one place where it all was the same. All three of them were identical. It's like, we're going to talk about this, but let you know that deception is very real risk here. So make sure that as we discuss it, that you understand that not just what I teach, who I am, what Jesus is saying here. They'll come in my name saying that there's going to be a lot of deception around religion. And he didn't name names or point at denominations, but he just said that the world of Christianity would be a place that was not insulated from the deception of the world. It's a place that partakes 100% with the rest of the world, unfortunately, in deception from time to time. For many will come in my name, verse 5, saying, I am Christ, and will deceive many. So there was one that said, many will come in my name saying, I am. I mean, one says that he is God, one says that he is Christ, who is God. It's still the same. But in this particular, so if you read, and I think it was Luke that said, many shall come in my name saying, I am. So basically, many shall come proclaim that Jesus was a God. And some have said that many shall come in my name saying that I am Christ. Basically, that would be a quote, meaning that they were Christ themselves, or the return of Christ. I'm not sure that that's what, it's possible. There have been false Christs. There was a passage that said there were false Christs. So yes, I think that could be a possible interpretation of this. But I think the overall point being that the use of his name, the use of his miracles, feigning that you were part of his inner circle. You even saw the disciples getting mad about that when Christ was still alive, right? So there was a lot of it. But what did Christ say at that point? They weren't going to have it all right, but if they're not actively against us, we're not going to fight them. So basically the point being, we're going to have enough real enemies in this world. I mean, people, like the guy for Target who was an actual Satanist who came up with a line of clothing that they were putting out. For us to be fighting with other Christians makes no sense. We've got enough real enemies to be fighting with. So I know that this congregation is a stellar example of you don't do that. I know that you have a nice cooperation with the other groups around here, and it's good. Good for you guys. But that we still need to be mindful of deceptions. It's not like when we get to the kingdom, God pulls out the test, and we got to get a certain score, and if we don't have certain things stuffed in our brain, he's going to turn us the other way. So we don't want to be deceived ourselves, and we don't want to deceive others. So there's always going to be that hunger and thirst for truth. And as long as we have that, and we get either snookered or we get mistaken, I think God knows that we're human, and we're susceptible to that, even in the church. So as long as, there's that one passage that says, even to deceive, if it were possible, the church. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That's not what that means. It is possible to be deceived and to be in the church. We do have the Spirit, which is a big help to prevent it in most occasions, but we're not invulnerable. If God was to make us invulnerable now, we would lose part of the message of why we need the kingdom to return. So, sorry, I got off script, but still, I think we're still on the same topic. All right, verse 6. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must occur, but the end is not yet. So all of them, all the three different versions, passages said, all these things must occur. So I believe the existence and prevalence and widespread nature of warfare after Christ's death to today was prophesied to occur. So that our warring, as we became more civilized, we did not become less warlike. You'll see utopian presentations like Star Trek and all that. Basically, once we got to a certain point in our development and enlightenment, we gave up war, hunger. That's not man's nature. Man's nature is the more we learn, the more we develop, the more we figure out how to hate and kill each other. That's just the nature of man and why we need God and Jesus to return. Verse 7, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in different places. So, I don't see this occurring before 70 AD. So I think this is a general prophecy about the nature of mankind over 2,000 years. And I think based on our readings of Revelation, there's also an uptick in occurrences of these things right before Jesus returns. We talked about the seals, so I think we're on the right track there. And all these are the beginnings of sorrow. I'm going to take a couple of minutes on that. I might be, but I think the ladies will appreciate it. So I wrote those notes down in Mark, and everybody's like, "Bill, this is not the most organized I've ever seen you." I get that. So it's here. That's actually the song list, which we don't need. Okay. And I think I've heard other speakers over the years go over this, but the birth pangs is really the meaning. So the beginning of sorrows is translated the first pains before childbirth. And I've always heard this to be explained as like the beginning of contractions. But then I thought about all of our kids and the times that we went to the emergency room when there was nothing going on. So ladies, what's the real first pains that occur? What are those called when you're pregnant? And no. Your husband is not an appropriate answer. Don't try that. All right. But the first pains that you feel, what are those called? We have a term for it now. Braxton Hicks, correct. So what if that actually means Braxton Hicks? Wouldn't that kind of change the understanding of it? It's not like the beginning of, because Braxton Hicks is, in an essence, it's pain and it feels like contractions, but it's false contractions. So what if he's saying, I lost my place here. Beginning is, there we go. It's because I made it in green here. I could barely read it. So verse 8, and these, so talking about all these things that occur, and these are the beginnings of sorrow. What if he's meaning this is Braxton Hicks contractions? This is going to happen all the time and has absolutely no impact on when the actual birth's going to be. Braxton Hicks start in the second trimester. So you could have the month wrong. You could have the year wrong. I mean, it could be like 3 months away. There was no term in Greek for Braxton Hicks contractions, but when I thought about it, that's as plausible as, when you start the actual contractions. So, it's going to occur before. You just don't know how soon before, or if it's something that happens half the time that you're pregnant. So anyway, I thought of that, and I didn't want to offend anyone, but it just occurred that is a possible meaning. So I know we're low on time, and we've gone over the last section. I want to jump down to the one that is, let's go down to 14. And this is one we spent a lot of time on historically. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come. So the feeling of this is completely different in the other two. This is the one that kind of connects, that it talks about the gospel being preached as kind of a precondition, and as opposed to the other ones kind of talked about it as more of a mandate. Mark 13:10 said, the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. Nothing indicated any immediacy or closeness to the return of Christ. And it still could be, the point being, in 8 through 13, he's talking about, hey guys, we'll talk about all what you want to talk about, but this life is going to be difficult. And the thing I want you to be doing is not worrying about when I'm returning. I want you to be out preaching. So, frankly, and given that he allowed the ignorance about when he was going to turn to be like several thousand years off, I think he may have put it exactly this way, not intending to connect, say, and this gospel shall be preached, and 10 minutes later, I'm going to be coming. I see no indication of that whatsoever. There's nothing in any of these that says, once this happens, I have no choice, but I'm going to be down here in 10 minutes later. That's I understand why people would say that. I just don't understand a biblical basis to be dogmatic about it. It's possible, but given that neither of the other two versions of the Olivet Prophecies indicate that, I would say it's a precondition. Is it possible that's already occurred? Absolutely. And the fact that it may have already occurred, does that mean that this is wrong? No, it didn't say that he's going to come. It just said, then the end shall come. It could be 1,000 years later. I just don't see the significance there. Okay. We talked about the abomination desolation. We're kind of, again, low on time. Although I have to say, Dave went way over when he came to Houston. So am I going to redeem some of these minutes, or am I going to let you guys? All right, I'll stop. When is service supposed to? When am I supposed to be done? Right now. Dixon said I needed to be quiet because he's going to come get a cook. And no, he's very nice. He said I could talk a few more minutes. Okay. So let's kind of wrap up. We talked a little about all three versions of this. What I say is, as we're looking at the Olivet Prophecies, taking into account Christ was trying to accomplish two things, talking about, three things. One was that he wanted them to be out and about and doing stuff immediately. Remember when he came and they all were huddled in one room, and then shortly after that he said, go out there and take care of business. Remember that passage? So he wanted to get that accomplished. He wanted to remind them that had to be done, but it was going to be difficult, and there was going to be trials and tribulations along the way, and that there was going to be, since they asked, a significant event in Jerusalem that was going to occur in the lifetimes of some of them, since they asked. But because they were also talking about the end of the age, which in biblical terms is more significant, he gave them some information on that. What he did not do is make it entirely clear which he was talking about. They had no idea. I guarantee you almost all those guys, when they died, were like, well, Christ is still going to return a year from now. And that's great. I hope when I'm dead, I'm like, Christ is going to return a year from now. I mean, that's because we as humans don't like the idea of missing out on things. That's the main thing. When you talk about, I'm not afraid of dying, but I don't like missing out on stuff that's going to happen. I think there's some stuff coming I really want to miss. I mean, really, really want to miss, right? So just be careful what you ask for. But as we've done going through, the three Olivet, what I say is, for homework, since I ran out of time, let's look at Matthew 24, the rest of the story, starting in 36 through the end of the chapter. I think if we're talking about kind of that time, that's the better passage. That's the one that gives you more information, frankly. So Matthew 24, not where we used to spend a lot of time, but where we're going to spend more time over the next week. So anyways, it was great talking to all of you. I appreciate you letting me come up, and hope to do so again in the near term. If you'll have me, I'll have to talk to Dave. He's the one with the hook. So anyway, but with that, we'll hope to see you soon.